Hello, Spark fans, and welcome back to Advancing Spark. Now, it's getting darker, it's getting colder. I had to go and find a jumper. What is going on in the world? It is November, and that means that we have a whole month of October's release notes for Databricks to look at. So today we do another roundup of all the things that have happened in the Databricks platform over the past month. I'm going to talk about what's good, what's interesting, what we see where, some little things that may seem a little bit innocuous, but actually mean a lot more than that. I'm going to have a look at those things. Now, obviously, one of the big news stories is the Databricks Runtime 10. We talked about that in the last video. That is obviously Spark 3.2. There's a new version of Spark going into the platform. And so that's obviously the big thing that happened in the past month. But there's lots of little bits and pieces that we'll take a look at and work through over the next, well, however long this video takes. The other new thing is that over the weekend, the Advancing Analytics YouTube channel, hi, hello, that's us, hit 10,000 subscribers, which is just insane that so many people actually are watching my descent into madness in my little office throughout lockdown. It's been an interesting time, but massive thanks to everyone who has subscribed. Massive thanks to you for joining us on this journey. So, you know, guys, lovely. If you're new around here, obviously, don't forget to like and subscribe. Do the thing with the button. Say hello in the comments. And obviously, we can talk about all these new things, what they mean to you. Are you using any of them? And where are you at? And with that, let's get on and have a look at the release notes. So, as usual, I'm on the Azure Databricks release notes. We've got our full release notes page. I'm going to dive into the October's release notes and then go all the way to the bottom. And then we can work through the month and kind of go up as each thing got released. So, first things first. Faster model deployment with automatic batch scoring notebooks. So this kind of batch inference notebook is now something you can do through MLflow. So if you've got a model that you've already registered that's in the model repository in staging or production or any of those things, you can now go into it and say, use this for batch inference, and it will generate a notebook that pulls that model, essentially kind of a template skeleton where you can use to pass data sets in and score it using that particular model that you got saved. So just a little shortcut, a little bit to actually allow you to more easily use those things. People don't have to know the various commands to talk to the MLflow model registry and pull those things back. It just gets you to where you need to be, and then you can start customizing it and building it into your own scripts. So a little shortcut, help you actually start building models. We should talk about MLflow a hell of a lot more than we do currently on the channel, and that's in the plans. Worry, we'll get there. Okay, so that's number one. It's quite nice. Number two, it's a bit weird. Kind of, I was looking at that going, oh yeah, I forget people actually use widgets in SQL. So basically there's two modes for doing it. There's the old way, the legacy way, is using this, that kind of percentage cut. Like not percentage, using the dollar sign, that thing. Those things that people in the US use. So if you have that inside your SQL script, it's going to know that that's actually coming from a parameter, and it's going to kind of create a widget for you. That is the old legacy way of doing things. So these days, if you are building widgets in SQL, you can just use this, create widgets. Create widgets text, create widgets drop down, and then there's this whole thing of saying get argument, which is just retrieving the value from your given widgets. So people actually are using this quite a lot. Not something I ever do. Now, realistically, anytime I'm building something that should be parameterized and it is very engineering, I'm building a framework and building something that's dynamic and reusable, I'll be using PySpark to do that and injecting SQL just for the hard-coded business transformation logic. That's how I tend to work. But actually, you can use it in SQL. You can parameterize your SQL scripts. If you've got a load of existing SQL logic and SQL code that are stored procs, and you want to pull them over and just switch in some parameters, you can do that using that create widget syntax and the get argument syntax. So I'd actually forgotten that was there, to be honest. A lot of people bringing it over. So percentage cut, not percentage, dollar sign cut is the old way of doing things. And so the big change that we've had this time, not a big change, but it's a change, is now saying you can now escape it with a slash before the dollar sign. It used to be you'd do it after the dollar sign. So if you have a load of text and there are actual dollar signs within that text and you don't want it to think that it's a parameter you're trying to do, you need to escape that character. And it's just a change for what's recognized as that character. So the escape is now before it, kind of as we're used to escaping things, rather than afterwards. Simple as that. A little bit of context for you. Okay. talk about minor changes. So Delta, when you're on your Delta Live Tables, the pipelines view, the things that you click weren't really hyperlinks. And so you couldn't open it in a new tab. It was really painful. And just a real small change. If we just hop over to our Delta Live Tables pipelines, we can now go open a new tab and we can open it. And it's just really convenient. It's not a big thing, but it just makes life a lot easier if we're managing this kind of stuff. So small change, big change that's actually very nice and very useful. And that's what we're seeing with a lot of the preview tech. And that the incremental changes are just quality of life improvements. They're just things that make life a little bit easier as people actually start using them in anger and giving feedback and going, could you please open it in a new window? Because I might want to actually look at several things at once, please. We've got a change and it's nice. Okay, another little change that makes life a little bit easier is the notebook path in the jobs UI. Again, seems like a small thing. Essentially, if we had a job, so I'll grab this one, I dig into the details. Now here, where we've got that notebook path, you can see it's telling me quite simply, this is the notebook I'm trying to read from, demo 1.3 inferring schemas. Makes sense, it's all good. What it used to do is actually trim and retain the start of that path. So it's a training, archive, DBX1 and 2, ... And I'd be like, well, which of those notebooks have you pulled? Yes, great, you're telling me it's one of the training notebooks, but it didn't give you the context. So kind of make that slight switch around. Rather than showing you the start of the path, it shows you the end of the path. But the thing that you're always going to see is the name of the notebook. And that just makes so much more sense. So yeah, nice little change. Good, makes sense, happy. So there's a few different changes going on. One of them is improving the Run API. So actually now when we're looking at the output of the Jobs API, what you get back would be a little bit better. So we get a little bit more stats. We'll get some of the kind of better metrics. We'll get kind of some of the things that are coming back in there. Essentially kind of returned output, logging, every detail, all that kind of stuff. So if you are starting to automate the Jobs API, and actually if you just want to see error details, that's super useful. And actually I saw it recently in Data Factory. So in Data Factory, normally, you know, it would error and go, yeah, broke. Here's the link, go and look at the notebook. And I saw today for the first time, actually the run error, and it just had the error from the cell had been pulled out and put into the response. And that's because we've seen that change in the jobs run output that lots of other things use. You might not be calling the API directly, but if something is using the jobs API, like Data Factory, like AWS Glue, like anything else that's integrating with Databricks, you're starting to see some better outputs coming from it, including the actual error message, which is way better. So actually very good. Lots and lots of stuff in there. It's much, much better to work with now. Speaking of something that seems like a small change, but it's actually a lot bigger than you think, is repos now support arbitrary file types. You go, great, yeah, well done. But previously when you used Databricks Repos and you hook up to a particular repository branch, you'd then open it and you'd find loads of folders in there and you'd see no files. You'd only see notebook files. Essentially, it would only tell you, here are your Databricks notebooks, and then anything else that happens to actually be in the repo, you wouldn't be surfaced. You wouldn't be able to see it. Now, what they've said is you can now do Python files, CSVs, JSON, YAML, all sorts of different things. So if you have lots of other things in your repo, you'll now see it in your Databricks repo. Okay, makes sense. Doesn't seem that big a thing. Everyone's like, yeah, okay, great. It's now working like an actual source control thing. Well done. It's bigger than you think. So one, we can now actually access things like data. If I've got a little bit of CSV or I've got a JSON file, that's my config that I hold in my repo, I can just test it directly. Rather than having to deploy it somewhere, having to put it into DBFS, rather than having to put it in different places, I can refer to it directly in my code. I can just open it up and test it. If I've got metadata that are all my processing rules, I can just read them directly and test them and build tests around it and actually use it properly, which is very useful. So data, that kind of stuff. Yeah. Okay. Good. You know, not that useful, but it's good. This is much more useful. So if you've got Python and R modules, so if you have certainly the way that we work, we have a Python library, which sits behind a lot of our business logic. So if we have kind of any reusable command, anything that any kind of little functions that we build, and even like some custom client logic, we'll put it into this Python wheel. And we've got a lot of processes, so we have to build it. and then we have to build it into the wheel, and then we have to attach it to a cluster, and then we can get our notebooks and test it against that kind of cluster, and then we find out if our code is working. So normally when we're working we're kind of working blind. We can write the Python, we can do things like flake-ate and kind of some unit testing, we can check that the Python's internally consistent. Can't run anything against those Python functions until they're wrapped in a wheel and deployed to a cluster, which is painful. If you then imagine we've got several developers working on the same bit of code at once, changing it, and you're adding a function, I'm adding a function, we're working on the same class. Whose version of that gets deployed first? Do we have to merge the code? But what if it's not? We've not tested it yet. I mean, and there's all sorts of problems there. What we can do now is inside our repo, so inside the feature branch, without checking in anywhere, without changing what's on the cluster, we can refer to Python modules that are those .py files within the repo. So rather than have to build it into a wheel and attach it to a cluster, I can refer to the Python libraries directly and build them as functions and test it within my code without having to do that. So it's not a great IDE. It's not great for going and developing your Python code. But if you are working locally in VS Code or PyCharm or something on your feature branch, get the changes in, go, does that work? Hit commit into your feature branch, not into your main dev collaboration branch, whatever you're calling it. Refresh, do a pull in your Databricks repo and test the code directly without having to build it into a library, without having to do it onto the shared cluster. So all your different developers can be working on their own version of the code. And then you can merge it in and you can deal with the merging when you merge into your primary dev line. And that's the way things should be working. So yeah, the ability to have files in the repo isn't just okay, we can actually see what's in our repo, and yeah, we can refer to little bits of data and config. It changes how we can develop by unlocking actual real consistent feature branching. So really, really big change, really, really interesting. I definitely advise having a look at it. That'll be a future video, right? I'll talk about new development practices we can do by referring to Python modules within Databricks repos. But bigger than you think. Cool. Also got a new Databricks connector for Power BI. So if you're using Power BI, you can see a few things. Mainly, it's about Unity Catalog. So Unity Catalog, we're going to see three-part naming. So rather than the two-part of what's the Hive database, what's the table name, we'll actually get to the point of saying which is the workspace, and then the Hive database, and then the table name. I assume I've not got sight of Unity Catalog yet. So it's interesting that we're getting the plugin, the pieces in place to support it before we actually can really even see or preview or play with Unity Catalog in anger. But again, it makes sense getting these building blocks in place. So when Unity Catalog is more available and we can all have a play with it, we'll be able to hook up things like Power BI and it'll work natively. Other few things, cancelable queries. Now, if you're in Power BI and you kicked off a big load and it kicked off a load of things to run against Databricks, and then you cancelled it in Power BI, it wouldn't necessarily send the cancellation over. So your cluster would still be there churning through your big query. And from Power BI, I'd be like, yeah, I'm done, I'm sorted. But actually your cluster is still being utilized by this query that no one wants. So cancelable query, very useful. It should have been in a long time ago, but it's very useful. And then improving query pass-through and making sure query folding, all that kind of stuff. We want to see all that working well. So definitely all good to see new connectors that are keeping those things moving. Okay, other bits and pieces. Jobs orchestration is now GA. So again, jobs orchestration is this multi-step job. If I go in, have I got a job that is multi-stepped? Maybe I can dive into my job. Is that one? There we go. So it's this kind of thing of having run this, then run this, then run this, then run these in parallel. It's that kind of, not particularly sophisticated, no like precedence constraints and skips and files and for each loops and stuff like that. But kind of a nice idea of dependencies to kick off various jobs that has been deployed to all workspaces and made to be the default jobs approach. But it's just gone GA. That's the main thing. You now use it in anger for production workloads and all that kind of stuff. All good. Again, that's the other reason why we're seeing the jobs API change. So those kind of two being joined together going, right, okay, the new API for the new orchestration, make all GA. So we're seeing a bit of a refresh in various pieces of that. Okay, data quality metrics for tables in Delta Live tables. So that's just kind of surfacing some of the metrics that you can get from a Delta Live table pipeline. So I've got one that I've just re-kicked off. I think it was this one. So we should see, there we go, we've got things like the rows processed, which hasn't refreshed. Ooh. Now I was having to dig around that. So that should be the data that we're actually getting from here. So when we're inside Delta Live table, we've got that kind of thing of those expectations being pulled out with the idea of past records, failed records, total number of rows, all that kind of stuff. So I've not had to dig around to really see it. But what we're expecting to see is now in the UI, rather than have to dig into those details into the actual event log, we should actually be able to see on the table that we're expecting these things, some of those bits and pieces of information. But I'm assuming because my cluster's now turned off because it's finished running, can't actually access anymore, which is, yeah, the cluster's restarted. All right. So it's surfacing that stuff. So if you're actually live there watching it go through, as it goes through and preps each one, you can pull out the kind of the basic metrics from the top. Doesn't seem that useful to me so far. Main thing is because you've got the detail there, and because all of these events, each of these different records, that JSON's actually stored in an events table inside your lake, and you can go and query it directly. So we might do another video about that. Actually, we might do a little video of pulling out those quality metrics, exposing it, building a quick dashboard over it. I'm kind of hoping that's going to be baked in lots of the marketing we've seen for Delta Live tables. We've seen these nice big pie charts. Everyone loves a nice pie chart, or other donut charts, with the metrics, the number of valid rows, all that kind of stuff. I've not seen that baked in anywhere yet. So we'll have a look at how you would build your own one. I'm hoping that we won't need to, and it'll just be a nice dashboard we'll see in the future, but we don't see it yet. And I've not seen much more than kind of just the quick number of rows and dead quality constraints, only while the cluster's still turned on. So interesting. I might have missed something there. I've only kind of had a quick look at it. We'll see. Another one on Delta Live tables is you always used to have auto scale turned on for your cluster. So when we were creating a Delta Live table, we've now got this little autopilot options. So we can say, do you want to scale or not? If I was doing just a really quick little test, I had to say, well, just go between 1 and 2. I don't need you to auto scale. I just want you to run. So sometimes if you don't want it to be flexing up and down as the workload changes throughout all the different dependencies you've got in your live tables, you can turn off auto scaling and go, no, I just want you to run with 5 workers, 2 workers, 3 workers, 10 workers, 700 workers, whatever it looks like. It's now up to you whether it auto scales or not. Again, just things people are asking for, things that are coming out as people use it a bit more in anger, feedback, getting a little bit better. Okay, some UI improvements. So now if you put in a path to a notebook that doesn't exist, it will tell you that you've put a path into something that doesn't exist. Previously, it would just take it in the settings, and then on runtime, it'd be like, that's not a thing. Whereas now, it'll do a little check, and it'll tell you if you're trying to create something pointing to a notebook that's not there, which is good, helpful, helps users build it out. And again, we're expecting, this to kind of be good for citizen ETL. So people kind of just have written their SQL, pure SQL, describing all these different live tables, and then adding it to a pipeline. That kind of just quick check. Have you done the right thing? Is this okay? Just makes sense when you're doing things in the UI. Then the other one I've not been able to see yet, but there is a provide feedback link. So again, just from the team behind it, from the product team who are building Delta Live tables, saying, what do you think? What would you like to see? How are you using this? Have you noticed anything when you're using it that doesn't work? Just give us feedback and start that two-way conversation. So it should be on either this view or in the details view. I've not seen it yet, so I'm assuming that's one of the changes that some of these changes take a little while to roll out across different workspaces. I've not seen it yet. I'm assuming we'll see it over the next week or so. And then that's provide feedback link, so we can dig in and say, hey, I really like this. It's kind of like Microsoft do it on a lot of their products. You've got this send a smiley face, send a frown. I like this feature. I don't like this feature. It's the same idea, except we should be seeing it on the Delta Live tables, both overview and details page going forwards. And then if you're on the preview, you're having to play with things, give feedback. Let them know. Start that conversation going, I hate this. Why am I having to do that? This is really good. Can we get more of this? Oh, I saw that feature once. Can you have a think about that? And I think, the more feedback they have, the more aligned it'll be to what people actually want. So it makes a lot of sense. And then finally, we have the GA, the general availability of Databricks Runtime 10. And again, that all important Spark 3.2 as part of it, with all the changes that went in there. Again, watch the last video if you want the details of that. The thing is, obviously, we do have the Photon version of that as well, and there is the machine learning version baked in. So we've got basically 3 new runtimes. So Databricks 10, Databricks 10 Photon, Databricks 10 machine learning, are all now out there and all GA if you're going to have to play with. Photon, technically. No, not GA, but still. Okay, so that is everything that we've got. A whole load of different stuff. Again, some kind of felt like they were kind of small, but then actually, like the arbitrary files in repos, when you dig into it, can actually unlock different behaviors, different ways of working, just improving our experience on the platform, improving how we can actually work in it as professional developer people. We can just build our better DevOps practices in. All things like that are actually really, really good to see. And again, a lot of the previous stuff, as normal, as I say every month, it's good to see this incremental iteration of improving the UI, adding in some usability, making it better for people to use. So yeah, that is my lot for today. As always, on that big old list of stuff, anything that pulls out for you, anything you think I've kind of glossed over and you're like, wait a minute, that is massive. That changes things for everybody. Let me know down in the comments, say hello, and yeah, hopefully we'll all discover even more stuff that we can have a play with. All right, that is me for now. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.